All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the 33rd webinar in the Offshore Wind Series, Learning from the Experts. I am Jessica Deely, a Senior Advisor on NYSERDA's Offshore Wind team, and it is my pleasure to be joined by today's experts, Jonathan Frazier and Jeff Stewart with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, otherwise known as BSEE. If you joined us last time, you will recall that Jonathan and Jeff presented on BSEE's role in overseeing offshore wind from design through decommissioning. If you missed that webinar, like me, you can watch it now on NYSERDA's YouTube channel. I did that right before joining you all. It's a good one. Before I introduce our speakers, Jeff and Jonathan, a few remarks for participants and some background on this webinar series. Next slide, please. Firstly, if you are experiencing any technical issues, please contact Sal Graven at the email address on the bottom of this slide. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings and presentation slides for all webinars in the Learning from the Experts series are available on NYSERDA's website at the address also on this slide. All participants have been muted. We will have time for Q&A following the presentation, so please use the Q&A function to submit your questions for the speaker. Next slide, please. New York State is working to advance the responsible and cost-effective development of at least 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Offshore wind is a critical component in achieving the state's goals of 70% renewable sources of electricity by 2030 and 100% zero-emission electricity by 2040. While offshore wind has been providing clean energy to other parts of the world for several decades, this industry is brand new to New Yorkers. To provide interested stakeholders and members of the public with accessible and partial information and opportunities for engagement on specific topics of interest, NYSERDA is hosting this educational webinar series called Learning from the Experts to connect the public with independent experts in key topics in offshore wind. We at NYSERDA endeavor to select learning from the expert speakers based on their expertise, not necessarily for an alignment of opinions with NYSERDA or the state of New York. If you would like to submit or suggest a topic for a speaker in the future or a future webinar, you can email us at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov or fill out a survey also available on our website, nyserda.ny.gov/osw-webinar-series. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters. Next slide, please. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Frazier and Jeff Stewart. Jonathan is a renewable energy specialist with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE, in the U.S. Department of Interior. He performs many various duties, including plan review, program development, monitoring of offshore activity and enforcement, all in support of the BSEE director. Previously, Jonathan has experience in oil and gas as a production inspector and inspection coordinator for the BSEE Gulf of Mexico region. He also served in the United States Coast Guard as a port state control examiner, pollution investigator, and responder, as well as an exercise coordinator. Jeff Stewart, our other expert, serves on the BSEE Renewable Operations team as a renewable energy specialist with a focus on safety management systems. Prior to joining BSEE, Jeff worked at Helmerich & Payne, I hope I said that right, a drilling contractor for 15 years. He proudly served in the U.S. Navy as a communication officer and damage control assistant on the USS Nevada. Thank you, and I will now hand things over to our speakers. Jonathan and Jeff, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much, Jessica. I really appreciate the time. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, my name is Jonathan Frazier, and I work for the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. I've been with the Bureau since 2015, but I've been specializing in offshore renewable for about 2 years in this new division that we're developing. So I'm going to start us off this afternoon talking about some of the general framework of our institution and how we oversee offshore safety, and then I'll pass it off to Jeff in a few slides. Next slide, please, Sal. So today for the agenda, we're going to be going over BSEE and explaining who our Bureau is. We're a relatively small Bureau with inside the Department of Interior. Next, we're going to talk about risk profiles. We're going to be comparing a little bit of the oil and gas profiles to the offshore wind profiles. There's some similarities and differences that I think are very important for us to highlight, and acknowledge about these two different industries. Next, we're going to be talking about the preemption of OSHA. This was a decision that was made jointly in between BSEE, OSHA, and the United States Coast Guard, and we're going to outline a little bit of why that is and how it functions. After that, we're going to move into performance-based regulations. What does that really mean, and how does that come into practice? And next, we're going to be talking about standards, what role standards play in offshore safety, followed by the safety management systems, and then finally, the enforcement program and how BSEE, as the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, how we see that and how we execute that mission. Next slide, please. Okay, so as BSEE, what do? We're responsible to ensure safe and environmentally responsible energy production across all the United States outer continental shelf. What this means as of today is different than it was a couple years ago. We really used to focus only on the oil and gas program, but right now we have two emerging industries coming up. We have offshore renewables, which includes wind, but it is a broader term. But then we also have carbon capture and sequestration, which is something that's going to be very important when it comes to meeting emissions goals for the United States as a whole in the future. So right now, our background has been in the oil and gas program since the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act in 1953. But like I said, we're really expanding and making this energy transition, not only on the production side, but also on the carbon capture and storage. So how do we as BSEE go about doing our jobs? Well, we use a combination of things. First is safety management and the enforcement. So we conduct a lot of various safety compliance oversight programs and inspections, but we also do, if there's an incident offshore, we go through that incident, figure out what had happened, work with the respective parties, trying to see if there's some type of repeatability of that chance of an incident occurring again, and what mitigations can take place to try to reduce the chance of a second or repeated occurrence. Then another thing that we look to is standards. We're going to be talking about this in depth in the later portion, but standards, when we say that word, we mean industry standards, and these are developed by industry for industry. And we have an opportunity to sit in these standard development meetings, and it's really fascinating. The groups that come in here, they are specialists in whatever their specific job or position is, or specific designs are in that respective piece of equipment. And they really bring a lot of industry expertise together. They develop, best practices, and then they continually update those practices as they learn, as technology adapts, and so forth. So we really hold standards in high regard as the Bureau. Next, we have environmental compliance and stewardship. So for us as the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, we have our sister agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who has been running the renewable program and had it in their section of the regulations for a very long time. That changed in January of this year, where the renewable energy program was divided in between the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement officially. I say that officially because we have always been there with BOEM from the beginning of the renewable energy program development. And when we talk about environmental compliance and environmental stewardship, we, as our BSEE folks and our scientific community, they work with the respective agencies of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, NOAA, NIMS, and other federal agencies to ensure environmental compliance. BOEM does the permitting for whatever that respective environmental allowance is. Say, for example, installing a cable and benthic habitats that a leaseholder needs to avoid while they're doing the installation. And then BSEE, our environmental compliance program, is compliance assurance. So BOEM does the permitting, leaseholder does the install, or whatever their operation is, and we do compliance verification. Did they actually comply with the permit that BOEM issued? And then, like I said, that's really a community effort with the other partners of NIMS and NOAA as well. For oil spill preparedness, as you can imagine, with us being an oil and gas-based program, as BSEE, oil spill preparedness is something that's very important to us. We regulate and mandate the plans for oil spill preparedness. And when we talk about plans, that's also, the type of equipment, the training, the personnel, the contractors, and making sure that the various scenarios have been accounted for when it comes to oil spill preparedness and responsible response coordination and management of a spill. The other thing we do with oil spill preparedness is we, as well as the United States Coast Guard and EPA, have authority, and we exercise it, called GUIs, or Government Initiated Unannounced Exercises. This is something I did while I was active duty in the Coast Guard, and then also did these exercises with BSEE while I was active duty, and have worked on them over here as well. And scenarios is we, as the Bureau, actually develop the scenario, And then we'll go to the respective leaseholder and we'll show up unannounced and say, here's your scenario. We need you actually to conduct a spill response exercise. This may be in the form of a tabletop exercise, or it may actually be in the form of real life deployment, and we'll time and evaluate their deployment and effectiveness of coordination. We as a Bureau have about 850 employees. They're located in 10 locations as official offices throughout the United States, but we have offices in Alaska, the Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic. And that's really, our geographic footprint is truly nationwide. So moving on to the right-hand side of this slide here, when you say it takes more than regulation, we actually have a lot of MOUs. Our website are being updated right now, so they may not all be on there, but we have a variety of MOUs with the United States Coast Guard, with BOEM, EPA, and so forth. And really those go to the heart of how we cooperate within those federal partnerships. When we talk about performance-based oversight, we're actually going to be covering that in some more detail later on. So just that is certainly a cornerstone of our oversight program. The Risk Analysis Committee is something internal to BSEE. This is where we take snapshots throughout different periods, maybe a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis, and look at different risk or performance across the industry. And then we have a very rigid amount of data analysis that we do to try to, again, identify trends, look for areas of improvement, possible changes in regulation, and then another subsequent thing that comes out of risk analysis is safety alerts. Safety alerts to us are very, very vital. It's a great tool that we have to communicate with industry and try to improve performance. A lot of this is something where we may recognize an incident or repeated incidents. And so we'll take a look at that data and the various scenarios and how that occurred, try to develop maybe some best practices for consideration or areas of improvement. And we develop a safety alert and then send that out to the community and certainly the operators and leaseholders to try to improve overall performance of the industry as a whole. The BSEE Safe Text Messaging System is something that was developed by our previous director, and it's a program for us. So when this was developed, before that, we would have safety alerts and we'd send them out, but a lot of it went to maybe the leads of the EH&S offices of different leaseholders or operators, but we weren't getting wide distribution. The great thing about the BSEE Safe Text Messaging System is anybody, any stakeholder can sign up to receive these safe text messaging notifications, and most of that comes out as alerts. Since that program has started, I want to say we have a neighborhood of like 5,000 people who are signed up to receive these text notifications, and we've sent well over 250,000 safety alerts through the text messaging system. For engagement, we're going to talk a little bit more about engagement, I'm sure, in the Q&A, but with engagement, we talk about that in terms of all stakeholders. We do certainly have working relationships with all of our leaseholders and operators, where if they have a question, we encourage them to have open dialogue and call us and try to resolve problems together. But also, any other stakeholders that have questions or have areas of concern, we're certainly open to the engagement. But we're also engaged with other folks such as the scientific communities, universities, or anybody else who wants to collaborate with us and try to improve environmental or safety performance on the OCS. And then finally, we have our research. Our research group is actually relatively big compared to the size of our bureau, meaning that we have a decent amount of funding that goes into continual research with a very, very specific scope. If you look at Department of Energy, most of their research is based on trying to make energy efficiency, reduce costs, and hopefully do some improvements in safety, reliability, et cetera. But our research is really very focused to safety, environmental performance. We have various research that's on our website. I encourage you to go and visit and take a look around. The way that our research program works is that, we'll either be requested or we'll develop a research scope of work. We put that out, and then subject matter experts throughout various industries, third parties, compete to actually to conduct the research. They conduct the research on our behalf. We monitor that and have dialogue with them throughout that entire research project, and they give us a final research paper. But then after that, we also make sure that those research documentation is peer reviewed and then publish it onto our website. So research on our website has a lot of good information for consideration. It does not mean that we necessarily have to use all the research that we conduct, but we conduct research on behalf of the Bureau and the general public for overall improvement. Next slide, please. When we think about BSEE obligations, we really kind of think about this in three pillars, and this all comes from our main document that gives us our authority and obligations is the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. And so we're really tasked with three things: safety, environment, and obstruction to other users. And when I say obstruction to other users, there's some other things on the front end that our counterparts in BOEM are responsible for, but what we see most of the time with obstruction are things like lost equipment. That's probably our bread and butter when it comes to obstruction of other users. If someone loses a piece of equipment overboard while they're doing an operation, and we think that it could impact, say, a fisherman or other users of the Outer Continental Shelf, then we have the authority and we exercise the authority to make them recover that object, as one example. But again, really our three pillars as a bureau are safety, environment, and obstruction to other users of the Outer Continental Shelf. Next slide, please. So risk profiles. So right now we're going to talk about similarities in between the oil and gas program and the renewable program, specifically offshore wind. Next, actually, Sal, if you want to just put all of them up, that's fine. So, okay, thank you. So for first, we have unmanned facilities. A lot of people, when we think about offshore turbines, once they're installed, they're going to be unmanned most of the time. And so a lot of people don't realize that oil and gas facilities are 4 out of 5 are unmanned all the time. They do have periodic visits, but it's a very similar risk profile. When we talk about thinking of a manned structure is very, very different. And we have a lot of different considerations for that versus an unmanned facility by itself. Next, we have the transfer of personnel. Transfer of personnel, that takes place, for example, where I came from in the Gulf of Mexico, that happens on a daily basis. Transfer of personnel comes from not only helicopters, but also transfer on and off of vessels to fixed facilities. So that's a regular risk that we're used to seeing and working around and being involved with. Next, we have heavy construction and using vessels. Right now, there's just under 2,000 oil and gas facilities in the Gulf of Mexico. At our height, I want to say we were north of 4,000 platforms. But with that being said, both in the installation of these offshore facilities in the oil and gas program and here certainly require a lot of vigilance, a lot of engineered lifts and technical capability to conduct that work. Same thing on the decommissioning side. Even though we're not installing more offshore oil and gas facilities overall as a production number, we certainly have a lot of heavy lift, heavy construction that's taking place during the decommissioning process in the Gulf of Mexico as my backyard. And so that's, again, something that's very similar when we talk about the renewable program. Next bullet, please, Sal. Next is marine resources and debris. So marine resources, when we talk about that, benthic habitats, critical species, and marine mammals, all of that, regardless of it being an oil and gas program or a renewable program, for our environmental compliance oversight, that really doesn't change that much in terms of their day-to-day work and how they evaluate those resources. It's always been something that has been a consideration and is something that we as BSEE have been doing for a very, very long time. Next is requirement of similar notifications for annual inspections. That's normal course of business, again, for structural integrity and a lot of those things. We're carrying a lot of that obligation and responsibilities over to the renewable program. But, that incident reportings, there are minor differences in the oil and gas incident reporting compared to the renewable program, but extremely similar in a normal course of business. And then finally, we have loss of control. So loss of control, when you think about that for the oil and gas program, that could be, something like a blowout preventer. That could be something as loss of production control for a wellhead, those types of things. Again, very similar notifications and working relationship that we'd have with the oil and gas industry that we're carrying over to the renewable program, though arguably the renewable program does not carry the same risk profile because oil and gas has so many inherent risks from an environmental and safety standpoint. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the risk profile differences for the renewable program. Number one is automation. So in the oil and gas program, I'm used to going on some facilities that are brand new and as modern as you could ask for. And then a lot of other facilities may have been there for 40 years or more. And so, when we look at the amount of wind automation, sensors, 21st century monitoring, one thing that they're able to do is a fantastic tool, we think, from a safety standpoint, is predictive maintenance and scheduled maintenance periods. So with all of those great inputs and the amount of automation and sensors on these offshore turbines, they're able to schedule their maintenance, wait for great opportunity for wind windows and those types of things. So we think that's a great risk profile difference compared to an oil and gas program. Next bullet, please. Next, significantly smaller capacity of oils. So when we talk about analysis for an oil spill response plan for an oil and gas program, particularly on the drilling side, we look at what the reservoir could produce as a whole. And then even on the production side, we're still looking at a significant amount of capacity that as long as the reservoir it continues to flow, there's a lot of oil here. Switching gears over to an offshore wind turbine or an offshore substation, those systems are closed systems that are filled with X amount of oil that they need for dielectric fluid, as an example. And there's only a fixed amount within those enclosed systems. And so it's a much more smaller capacity and it's easier to manage, even if there is a spill response. The other big thing is adequate secondary containment. Again, when you think of reservoir production, right, you would never try to make a secondary containment tank to hold all of the possible amount of oil produced from a reservoir. However, when you have a fixed capacity, you can certainly make secondary containment capacity for an offshore substation's liquids or within an offshore turbine. And they do have adequate secondary capacity to cover those liquid losses inside of the turbine or the substation, which is a great thing compared to the oil and gas program. Next bullet, please. Certainly significantly less fire hazard. Again, compared to our oil and gas program, with the amount of natural gas that's released as the normal process of production and drilling. And then of course, it only takes a spark. The oil and gas risk profile from a fire standpoint is significantly higher than we move our minds over to what an offshore renewable facility looks like in that risk profile. Next bullet, please. Interior climate controlled environment. So this is a very, very big difference that we see compared to the oil and gas program. So, of course, with wind turbines and general and production of electricity, you want to reduce corrosion possibilities and protect your electronic equipment as much as possible. So inside of these turbines and substations, they're all climate controlled for humidity. That not only protects your electrical equipment, but also is going to certainly make a big difference when it comes to corrosion and how that plays a factor on your facility. In the oil and gas program, all of these are pretty much open air facilities. And so the corrosion degradation that we see on oil and gas, we anticipate is significantly higher than what we would see in these traditional, in these turbines and substations. Next slide. Oh, finally, significantly smaller gas leak potential. Again, I did already talk about gas and carbon production is significantly higher. Here, again, it's fixed quantities of gas. And yes, we do have SF6 gas. They could be in these substations, but again, from a total capacity standpoint to the oil and gas program, significantly different than our traditional risk. Next slide, please, Sal. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about the preemption of ocean. So this occurred in 2019 in the Federal Register. If anybody wants to read it in full, you certainly can. We have a couple of text and blurbs here that we're going to be showing in the next two slides that really talk about what this means in execution. So if you can go to the next bullet, please, Sal. So this again is an excerpt from the Federal Register, and it says that the Department of Interior will act as the principal federal agency for the regulation and enforcement of safety and health requirements for the Outer Continental Shelf renewable energy facilities. DOI is considered the regulatory program to occupy the field of workplace safety and health for personnel and others on the OCS, renewable energy facilities, and to preempt the applicability of OSHA regulations. So what that means again is this was a joint decision made in between BSEE, OSHA, and the United States Coast Guard, recognizing that not only do we already have a presence and we're used to working in the offshore environment, but I'm actually going to be passing off to Jeff here in a little bit more to talk about nuances in between the OSHA standards. But again, this was a joint decision, and we'll always certainly look to and have partnerships with OSHA when considering these type of safety factors. So next slide, please. And Jeff, I apologize. Am I picking this one up or is this you?
This one.
Okay, go ahead.
You got it.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Go ahead to the next bullet, please, Sal. So again, this is part of the excerpt from the Federal Register notice, which says that in carrying out our responsibilities, the Department of Interior will collaborate with OSHA on the applicability and appropriateness of the workplace safety and health standards in offshore industry. Next bullet, please. So the way that we look at this is OSHA is considered baseline of performance, but the preemption allows for alternate ways to meet the same intent. You know, one part of that is considering that most of the experience coming over here for offshore wind development is actually coming from Europe. You know, we want to make sure that these folks can come over with their experience and things that have been working for them in that very similar space for, you know, well over 20 years and bring that experience over here and not try to just overlay OSHA and just make them have to do a requirement if they have a really safe alternate way to meet the same intent of those regulations. The other big thing too, again, is making sure that we're not just going to take an OSHA standard and say, oh, it applies offshore, because there's a lot of things offshore where it may not be practical to implement in that same manner as intended for an onshore activity. All right, Jeff, I think this is you.
Right. Well, thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, appreciate the opportunity from NYSERDA to talk to you all today. Excited to continue on the conversation. So we're going to talk about some regulations, standards, and then kind of get to my focus area, safety management systems. So renewable energy regulations, currently as written in the US, they are performance-based. So what that means is we are specifying the outcome required, but it leaves the measure to achieve how you want to meet that outcome up to the discretion of the regulated entity. So this is in contrast to very prescriptive regulations, what you would probably see in BSEE's oil and gas driven regulations. They're very prescriptive that will tell you how to achieve compliance. What you will see in the renewable energy regulations is that it's open. To Jonathan's point about preemption of OSHA, right? We would consider that a baseline, but it allows for flexibility to adopt other standards that would meet that minimum baseline of what OSHA requires and make sure it's applicable and what's right to be used offshore. We're going to talk a little bit about standards here in a minute, so I'm going to skip this bullet. Sal, if you want to go to the next. Right, so I just said what are performance-based regulations. So we can click to the next one. All right, so again, these are performance-based regulations. What we have, we're specifying the outcome. It also allows us as the regulator flexibility in how that outcome might be achieved. Again, where there is that flexibility, there is still the requirement that can be demonstrated that it will be still safe. This isn't you can choose anything out of the blue. They still need to be good quality consensus-based standards. What an operator or contractor might be using. Again, there's still that review process by BSEE through different means to see what standards are being selected to meet the regulations. If you want to slide to the next one, where we're going to talk about now how do industry standards play a role in those performance-based regulations. So again, BSEE encourages the use of effective consensus-based standards, recommended practices, industry guidelines. In the future, I'm probably just going to say standards rather than all three of those, but understand all three of those can be acceptable to be used. And really where we see that the benefit of using those consensus-based standards is it really helps to create a good level understanding of what the expectations are for the operator and their personnel that are working offshore, but also for their contractors and subcontractors. If you're using an industry standard, it's something that is well known. It is recognized by the industry as a best practice, the best way to be doing work, and allows easier coordination between companies as well. As we mentioned, right, that this is performance-based, and so BSEE has not required the use of specific standards. To date, there's only been one that we've incorporated into the regulations that must be used. It's a very highly technical one around structural engineering. When you look at the oil and gas regulations, you'll see over 100 standards that have been incorporated. The intent is, again, to leave that open, to have the industry drive what they feel like the best standards are. So there are, as Jonathan mentioned, two sets. If you can go to the next slide, Sal, we do have international standards as well as some domestic that are being produced. Again, these industry consensus-based standards use that expertise from the industry to help kind of raise all boats, as the saying goes. So certainly in international, they've had a lot more experience. There's very good wind-specific standards that are available. Nationally, here within the US, there's not as many standards. There are standards that are being developed, though, within the US to help address some of those gaps. BSEE is involved in the standard writing process. We are not a voting member. We're not there to necessarily provide our technical expertise. We do want to make sure that certain questions do get answered. If there's gaps that we've noticed, there's issues we've seen, we want to be sure that those are addressed within a standard. We'll speak about that. But again, we really want the industry to be driving what you feel is the best and safest way to do something. So that being said, there are national and international standards under development. So Sal, if you go to the next slide, and BSEE definitely encourages engagement with those standard setting bodies, whether you're a leaseholder, a contractor, if you represent a union or an equipment manufacturer. And I would say if you're on this call, you probably fall under the other interested parties if you don't fall into one of the ones above. Again, would highly recommend and encourage, if you can, to be engaged in that process. That's how we get the best standards, is with different voices and different perspectives coming together to write something that can help the whole of industry. So again, would encourage involvement in different bodies that are setting standards right now for offshore wind. Go to the next slide, Sal. So that's a little bit about standards. We've talked about regulations, so I want to talk about where the regulations are. As Jessica mentioned at the beginning, we did hold a webinar a couple weeks ago that talked about really focused on the split rule and what the regulations say and our scope of work. So we're just going to briefly cover it here today. So as Jonathan mentioned, we've worked with our partner agency, BOEM, for a long time. All of the regulations were under BOEM. The split rule, oddly enough, split the rules between BOEM and BSEE. And have moved kind of the enforcement side and the safety side to BSEE. Those can be found under 30 CFR 285. There was a notice to leasee that was published. There was I think it was around a 2-hour presentation that was given by BOEM and BSEE to discuss that. And again, we kind of covered the BSEE portion a couple weeks ago at the webinar here with NYSERDA. So you can go to the next one. So as a brief highlight of what the split rule covered, BOEM has retained the issuing and managing of leases. They're conducting the NEPA analysis. They provide approval for site assessment plans, construction and operations plans, and general activities plans, deal with the financial assurances. So BSEE, we have taken over the operational safety and environmental protection. Some of the things we review and we'll sign off on are the facility design reports and fabrication and installation reports, the safety management systems, which we'll discuss here further in a minute, oil spill response plan, and emergency response procedures. And again, we also work on decommissioning, anything around enforcement, incidents, investigations, inspections are all fall under BSEE, under our operational safety and environmental protection. Go to the next slide. This is the last one that kind of talks about the regulations. Again, we really went into depth of each stage at the previous webinar. What I do want to just highlight real quickly here is, if you'll notice, between BOEM and BSEE, the part underneath, it's not a strict line. There's not a before this point is BOEM and after is BSEE. There is overlap. There's a lot of coordination and working together between BOEM and BSEE that will continue past the split rule. Generally, after the construction and operations plan or COP is approved, again, generally the regulations switch to BSEE as the primary regulator. Before that is BOEM, but there's certainly overlap and close coordination between the two bureaus, kind of in that overlap area. And again, if you'd like to hear more, there's the webinar that was recorded. There's also some information on the BSEE website. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about worker safety specifically and talk about safety management systems. So if we want to go to the next slide. So the safety management systems, this should form the foundation of your safety program. This is the key. This is the bedrock regulation that we're going to refer to. And we expect safety to be a primary driver in operations and in construction for these wind farms. BSEE encourages, we talked about standards, to encourage operators and contractors to select an SMS framework standard to use. What we've seen to date has been predominantly either ISO 45001 or API RP 75 4th edition as the standards that are being utilized by operators or contractors. And there are some other standards out there as well that have been discussed that we've not seen yet, but certainly selecting a standard, seeking certification to that standard is another great step to take. But what that framework does is really help again, align and make sure that you have a functioning system and not just components of a safety program. Again, that SMS then identifies the standards that are being adopted. We talked earlier about standards. So whether that standard is around more specific risks, say working at heights, control of energy, transferring of personnel. Again, there'll be specific standards there that fall under that safety management system framework or umbrella of how that all works together. And again, due to the nature of the work, there's expectations that the operator or leaseholder will have significant oversight and interaction with the contractor's safety management system, as the majority of the construction and installation work is being handled by contractor employees using contractor vessels. So that will be a key part of the success, safety success and operational success of the program as we move forward. Moving to the next slide. The good information on the slide. What I really kind of that second bullet really talks about it being effective in communication. So what I have previously told at different conferences and to operators, if your SMS is sitting in a binder and you've got it all printed out and it's all pretty, and you've got all the procedures you need, and all it does is sit in a binder on your shelf, that is not an effective safety management system. It can't be just a bunch of papers and policies, written procedures. And those are all clearly important and form the basis, but it's that effective communication and actually implementation and functioning of the SMS down to the worker level is the key and what we're really emphasizing to make sure is effective. What you'll see is, that the last bullet there, right? How will BSEE know the SMS is working? One of the things that I do want to certainly point out is we understand that there will be incidents. We understand that no system is perfect. We want to be sure that the system is designed, right? It limits those opportunities for something to happen. But if something does happen or something unanticipated happens, again, the ability to identify what the issue is, really understand what the root cause is, and then fix that root cause in a meaningful, systematic fix is going to be very important to BSEE. Putting a Band-Aid on something or trying to address a symptom is not signs of a fully functioning and effective safety management system. So again, we want to be sure we're focusing. It's okay that things happen. We want to have those communications with the operators, understand what's going on, and then again, really focusing on what the operator learned from it and what they're doing to prevent it from occurring in the future. Go to the next slide, Sal. We've talked about the regulations again. Some of this was focused the last webinar where these different touch points come from. We'll have on SMS. Certainly, too, I'll talk about today at the COP stage, or again, the construction and operations plan. While the COP process is driven by BOEM, the regulations do require the safety management system is submitted directly to BSEE for our review to understand the plan and the description of what the leasee will do for their safety management systems. The other part of that is during construction. And so what we've seen to date with the two projects that are in that phase, actively installing, putting steel in the water right now, is to determine the functionality. And I've used that word a couple of times, and that's a word we want to be sure that the SMS is functioning. It's a living, breathing system that's out being utilized by the field. It's helping workers understand where the risks are, what controls are in place, how to properly do the tasks and activities that they're asked to do per their job, and then to do so safely. So those are some touch points that we'll have on the SMS, and certainly during the operations phase, which will be the longest phase for 20 or 25 years for a project. Again, understanding that that safety management system is in place and is functioning throughout the life cycle. So if you can go to the next slide. So to help address some of those questions we've received around SMS and about some of those items I just talked about during what's expected to be submitted to BSEE, we've created an SMS Expectations document that is available online on the BSEE website. If you go to the Renewable Energy page, it's one of the resources down towards the bottom. It talks about our expectations. What you will not find is it's not a list of here's the standards we expect, or here's a checklist that needs to be met. Again, this is a performance-based system. We want to provide some expectations of what we're looking for. The next slide here in a minute will show what the actual regulations say for an SMS. You'll see that it's very brief and they're very broad. And so we did want to provide some guidance of some areas that we wanted to be sure when we're talking about functionality or descriptions of an SMS, some general areas of what that should include. And again, as we learn, as we grow, this document I'm sure will be updated. So next slide, please, Sal. So what you see here, this is the total of the SMS regulations. It's these 6 items. That's it. There's some potential changes coming once the modernization rule is finalized. It's been closed for comment. We did receive a great number of comments, which is great for us to start looking at. But this is the current regulations as they're written. You can see the first one really says it all, right? The SMS should ensure that the safety of personnel and anyone on or near your facilities. That pretty much says it all. You don't need a lot more than that. Very broad, but important to understand how that SMS plays that critical role in safety. The one thing I do want to talk just a minute about is something we're starting to see more of, and as we get closer to operations, B will start playing a more important role, which is the remote monitoring, control, and shutdown capabilities for the project in the wind farm. So when we start talking about remote monitoring, again, control and shutdown, one of the key elements of being able to do that safely will be to have a secure network. So we're going to start talking about cybersecurity, how that plays a role to meet the requirements here in B. Again, understanding that there are other federal agencies out there that have some space and some overlap within the cybersecurity world. So BSEE is actively working with federal partners to kind of determine who has the right standards that need to be followed, where there are other requirements placed on operators in the regulated community to make sure that we don't want to be duplicating work, but we also want to ensure that there's no gaps in cybersecurity. So that's going to be an important one moving forward, and something that really has to be discussed early on in a project. It's not something that can be that an operator can wait until the last minute to realize that this is going to be something that they're going to have to deal with. So we are starting to talk about that more, talking about, again, what role that will play within the SMS and in the larger security of project. So that covers it for safety management systems. Again, I appreciate NYSERDA this opportunity to talk to you all today, and looking forward to the questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan for everyone's favorite topic, enforcement.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. So when it comes to enforcement for the Bureau of Safety and Environment, we've got several tools at our disposal. And so one is what we call a notice of noncompliance. So to issue a notice of noncompliance is simply documentation of the violation, and it involves various enforcement levels as well as the corrective action. What we typically see is an enforcement action could be either a warning, a component shut in, a facility shut in, or an operation shut in. So to talk through that briefly, a warning would simply be, hey, you know, there's been an issue, we're documenting, and we need a corrective action, how it's not going to be occurring in the future. If we are issuing a component shut in, that component would, for example, not be allowed to be used until a corrective action was made. A facility shut in would be just that, stopping operations on the facility. Or an operation is saying that there's an operation that occurred that we consider unsafe, and there's corrective actions that need to be taken place before that operation can continue. Next for enforcement levels are civil penalties. Civil penalties are issued on a per day basis, but they are not associated with every violation. There's only certain civil penalties or certain violations that we would consider a civil penalty. And with that being said, when you go in and you start evaluating a civil penalty, you have a per day fine basis, and then you have what are called aggravating and mitigating factors, and those go into consideration of what that total amount may be. The next is the issue of a cessation order. This would be ceasing all activities on a lease. This is certainly one of these things that it's more a tool in the toolkit, but not something that we would consider being used on a very regular basis, but again, something that is available to us should we need it. Next, we have the order of lease suspension, and generally this is used to comply with judicial decrees. Something is ordered through our respective judge through whatever court case they're having. We may need to issue a lease suspension to help accommodate that judicial decree. And then finally, we have a recommendation to cancel the lease in its entirety. That would not be a BSEE decision at all. That would go all the way to the Secretary of the Department of Interior for revocation, or essentially relinquishing and taking that lease back and putting it back, taken away from the Outer Continental Shelf consideration for development. So again, not something that we really necessarily envision using, but it is available to us as a tool as per the regulation provided. Next slide, please, Al. So thank you much for your time. Really appreciate all the attention to the presentation. What we have right now in front of us is my email and Jeff's email, as well as some of the tools and websites that we talked about today is our website, BSEE.gov, and then our sister agency, BOEM.gov, that can help you if you guys have any questions about the process or some of the general development all the way through the construction operation plan phase. And so with that, that is everything that we have. I'm happy to take any questions in the time we have remaining.
All right, thank you both so much. We have just a few questions. Let's see if a few more come in the Q&A. As a reminder to the audience, you can put your questions there at any time and we'll try to address them. So the first one came from Richard, and it was about incident reporting. Just interested in the differences in incident reportings and whether or not BSEE requires near miss reporting.
Yes, so for incident reporting, you can find all that within the regulations of it's 30 CFR 285-831, and that outlines our thresholds for incident reporting. And so while near miss is not included in that as part of the regulation, that is certainly something that is folded within safety management system and making sure folks continually learn from their operations. So we'd expect that even if they do have a near miss, that that respective entity is working with their contractors and whoever else was involved to conduct an analysis and try to prevent a reoccurrence of that situation. Jeff, is there anything else you'd want to add to that one?
No, I think when you start talking from the safety management system perspective, I think a lot of times, having done a lot of investigations in a previous career, I think we learned a lot more in our near misses than we did the actual events. A lot of time near misses, you get lucky and then it's a near miss and not an actual event. So again, I think being able to learn from those events and tie that into your SMS for continual learning, whether it's updating procedures, getting the right equipment, modifying training, there's a lot of different ways that can take on, but those are great to learn from. So it might not be your specific requirement to report to us, but that doesn't mean that they're not very important.
Great, understood. Another question, the Limitation of Liability Act, LOLA, limits the vessel owner's liability to the value of the vessel and freight. And the Death on the High Seas Acts limits a vessel owner's liability for deaths of non-seafarers, ergo passengers, students, vacationers. If there's an accident involving wind energy employees, how will offshore wind workers be classified in light of LOLA in DOHS? Any ideas?
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, so I do not know. I will say, right, we're from the legal standpoint, don't know from liability if we're going to weigh in on that, Jonathan, unless you've heard something
No,
else.
we couldn't speak to that.
Got it. Very good. Okay, well, moving on to a few other kind of broader questions. Is BSEE involved in the establishment of consensus-based standards in industry guidelines? You mentioned you're looking to the industry there, and NYSERDA is definitely brainstorming on this with NREL and our surrounding states, but would BSEE have a role as an advisor or take part in that process?
So yes, BSEE is involved in standards development. I know I'm double booked right now that there's a standards development for workforce development going on right now that I'm missing. But yeah, so we're actively engaged in those. Again, I think our role is not to develop it ourselves, right? We're not there to write and tell the industry. Again, if we were to do that, we would do that through regulations. But having a seat at the table for those standard setting meetings, discussions, work groups, again, can help us allow to provide some input into, again, where we see gaps, where we see questions that need to be answered, make sure that it's helping industry where we think there's some help that's needed. I think that's primarily what we try to do.
Yeah, and to that point, so I mean, like Jeff said, he's missing a call today, but he and I were both in a call for another standards development yesterday, and we do have the opportunity to review and comment on some of the, the standards, although we're not a voting member. So we're very actively participant, but we're not a voting member in the finalization of the standard. So.
Very good. One of the main certification standards that's been broadly accepted in the US so far has been GWO. It's popping up everywhere. Everybody's establishing their own GWO facilities. Do you see another kind of standard or certification that is cropping up that is just as important and should be valued just as highly as GWO by chance?
Oh, I have not. I know we've had, so the meeting that's actually occurring right now, again, is on workforce development. Meeting Jonathan and I were on yesterday, was talking about training requirements for safety. I have not seen one. That doesn't mean that there's not one out there or that there's one. So we're not, it's not a requirement to adopt a specific standard. I realize I did not say that if you do adopt a specific standard, whether it's GWO for training or something else, we're going to hold you to that standard. So even if it's not required by BSEE, if you say, I'm going to meet the standard, then we're going to expect that you will meet the standard.
And just to add one more thing to that as well is, for the onshore environment and giving access to wind turbines, that has been accepted in the US widely. That's GWO being the baseline and considered simply the baseline to be able to, get access to a facility.
Very good. It's not the end all be all of the safety certifications. It's just the start. So, the standard setting bodies are similar to perhaps the ones that set the standards in oil and gas. And just curious on the history of that, I think this question is, can you speak a little bit about how long it took the oil and gas industry to come up together with their list of safety standards and how they got clarity on what they were expecting in their safety management?
Yeah, so when you look at so API is the generally the oil and gas standard setting body, right? So they've been around for I think 100 years now, so they've had a long time to work on developing this. When you look at their safety management system standard, and that was just recently revised several years ago, and really had a lot of learning after some of those regulations were passed after the Deepwater Horizon Macondo event in 2010. Yeah, so they've continued to grow. They've had a lot of learning since then, again, where they just made a pretty radical overhaul of their document, which is the one I mentioned. It's the API Recommended Practice 75. It's the 4th edition that's now out there. There is an ongoing work to modify that to be applicable for wind. And so they're going to call that API 75W. So that is another standard that's in development. But I think one of the things I think that the BSEE would encourage, again, is finding those standards that have, a new standard doesn't mean it's bad, but there are certainly standards that have been proven over time, which is why we mentioned international standards. We mentioned the standards that are being used maybe in Europe or in other places that have a good history to learn what's worked and what hasn't worked in the offshore wind space. So understanding what standards are appropriate. You obviously mentioned API. When you look at the offshore wind space, ACP is the standards development organization that's been accredited to write new standards. So ACP is working on some. There's another organization called the RESCA that can help bridge those currently written international standards and make them U.S. domestic standards. They have the authority by ANSI to do that. So again, both those groups, I would encourage, if you're not involved, to reach out to them and see how you can become involved in the standard setting process.
Very good. Maybe we have time for one last question before we close it out. This is such an interesting topic to me. Appreciate the expertise. So last one, how can state offtake agreements reinforce safety requirements of the federal government? And what additional reporting or planning requirements could be implemented in the offshore wind space?
Jonathan, you take a crack at that first?
Yeah, can you actually repeat that, please?
Sure. Just, how can state offtake agreements, what we're doing when we're purchasing our power from offshore wind projects, we ask a lot, it's more than just electrons, especially here in New York State. What can we do when we are evaluating projects or looking for proposals that would reinforce safety requirements of the federal government? Is there any additional reporting, tracking that we at NYSERDA or any other agency that is authorized to purchase offtake from offshore wind, is there anything that we could do to implement, safety or unified planning requirements across the space?
I'm not familiar enough with offtake agreements to speak too intelligently on it, but what I could say when it comes to things like reporting, one thing that we struggle with, right, is near miss, for example, is not something that's required by regulation to be reported to us as the regulators. However, when we do SIMS evaluations, we certainly are going to be interested in that. The other thing that we have to consider too is we actually are seeing a lot of active voluntary participation for near miss reporting and analysis through various NGO entities that are set up by the actual offshore wind industry. G+ is one that actually has data across 14 countries. We leverage that information a lot, and it's got a lot of great near miss reporting. And one thing we struggle with, and something to keep in mind, is duplicative reporting can get really messy, right? So if everybody's really making a point to hey, we're all being active, good stewards and participants in the G+ or in the International Marine Contractors Association with those near-miss reportings, and then we ask for another set of near-miss reporting, it can be taxing. So it's really extrapolate value out of something like an extra ask that's beyond our regulations.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would add to that, again, just as you can have duplicative reporting requirements if, you know, when you look at these projects, and obviously, right, we're concerned in the OCS space, right, but there is that space in you know, state waters, and then you get to your substations on land, and now you do fall under OSHA. And so when you start looking at adding, you know, if you have very specific requirements that you might put in that are different from what we at BSEE might do, which is different from what OSHA might do, you know, it can cause confusion for the operators trying to meet 3, 4, 5 different safety regimes. You throw in the Coast Guard as well offshore. It can cause a lot of confusion and a lot of angst of what they need to be doing, which again, I think hopefully with the performance-based management, you know, approach we're taking, it allows for that flexibility to make sure that operators and contractors can, you know, adopt one safety management system that applies across the board, no matter whose jurisdiction it is. If it's one process that they're following, makes that easier for the worker, right? The worker doesn't have to worry, you know, how far am I offshore? Whose rules do I need to follow? Well, did I step across land or the mean tide? And now all of a sudden I'm falling under somebody else and I have to change, you know, the color of my harness. You know, to minimize those type of requirements will be important, while still, again, enforcing and emphasizing the need for a safety management system will be important.
Sounds like a lot of collaboration is needed amongst the regulators and those applying to make sure maybe we're all asking for the exact same thing to simplify the process, but keep it safe. All right. Well, thank you both. And thank you all for joining us for this Learning from the Experts webinar. A reminder that the webinar recording and presentation slides will be available on NYSERDA's website. Our next webinar in the series will be on July 19th. Experts from the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems will discuss environmental data management related to offshore wind, a really big topic I know a lot of folks are excited for. And on August 23rd, 2 experts will discuss research and regulations for marine mammal interactions with offshore wind. You can register for future webinars through our events page at wind.ny.gov. If you have, again, requests for future topics, or you want to hear about certain information regarding offshore wind in this series, please email us at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov or fill out our Learning from the Expert survey posted on our website. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.